recording, and then I will share my screen. And hopefully you can all see this. Just give me a quick thumbs up that you can. Great. Okay, well, welcome to the deeply exciting, at least for me and hopefully all of us, topic around measuring advocacy impact. Today, we're going to be guiding you through some of the tips and tricks, as well as sourcing from you ideas on how do we know what works in advocacy and influencing. I need to move these captions out of the way. Um, and the presenters today are myself. My name is Sara Olhak, and I'm the Knowledge, Evidence, and Learning Lead here at Moving Minds Alliance. And I'm joined by Eric, who I will allow to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Nice to have you. My name is Eric Opoku, Director of Impact Right to Play in the UK. Nice to have you here.
Great. And you'll be pleased to know that you have two like mega evaluation nerds with you today. So this is going to be really exciting. So our day is going to be just it's a welcome from all of us, which we've done. We'll do a quick poll with you, as well as a little bit of a discussion on what that means and how it all goes. And then we'll kind of launch into a session around Advocacy Merle 101. Eric will take you through what we mean when we talk about contribution versus attribution, and then we'll do a case study together, and then have a discussion about it, and then we'll return to the main session, where we will be asked, as Katie had mentioned, to share kind of one key piece of feedback back to the group. So, is there anyone here who would like to volunteer to be the person who reports back? And I'm not going to put anybody on the spot here, but if anyone is interested in doing that, if you just put up your hand. I don't know that I can see everyone. Uh, Anyone? Thank you. And is it Angelica or is it Angelica?
Both work.
Okay.
Angie? Oh.
Angie. Okay, Angie. There we go. Angie, thank you so much for volunteering. Really appreciate you. Okay, I will now um sorry, that's just even though you have two screens going, it doesn't ever seem to want to work. Um so Today's session is going to cover, the fact that advocacy and influencing work is difficult is no surprise to anyone, but that is because we know that change is incremental, nonlinear, and shaped by multiple actors and factors. So today we're going to be exploring practical approaches to assessing advocacy impact and focusing on contribution rather than attribution, talking you through what all of that means, thinking about tracking observable changes over time and integrating advocacy measurement into existing evaluation frameworks. And basically using our approach as a case study. So it's not a real live example. It's just one that we've kind of built on what we're already doing. You're going to be looking at indicators, evidence sources, and tools, and contributing insights towards a future ECD and ECD and Crisis Advocacy Measurement Guide, which is something that we are hoping to create as a result of this workshop with you, and also in general as a resource for the sector. So some of our objectives for today's session, and their kind of associated outcomes, are that we want to introduce practical principles for measuring advocacy and influencing, focusing on contribution rather than attribution, which will help you to then explain why advocacy impact is better assessed through this modality than the other. The second objective is to generate your insights on useful tools, indicators, and evidence sources that could form a future advocacy measurement guide for ECD in crisis. This is kind of a major output that we're hoping to develop as after working with you. And then the third objective is to share our approach and key indicators for measuring impact speaking around the kind of programs, projects, and campaigns that we're thinking about. And so hopefully by the end of this session, you'll also have access to practical indicators and evidence sources for tracking advocacy and influencing outcomes, as well as understand how best to integrate advocacy measurement into your evaluation systems in your organizations if you are doing advocacy. And even if not, some of these approaches are really useful for complex contexts, and in our context we have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that we don't know how they work, but hopefully these approaches will help you to do that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, if you have your cell phones with you, or if you have in your browser, I can copy this link. Whoops, hold on one second. Sorry, it's always a joy, isn't it? Let me just stop sharing this one and I'll just go to the Mentimeter, and we're going to do this together. And I'll actually also paste the link in the chat for you to join that. And hopefully this should work pretty smoothly. Oh, I don't know that I can put it into, here we go. I've put the link into the chat, and then I will also now go into the Mentimeter and we can work through it together. If someone can just confirm with me that it shows up and it's telling you that it's about to launch.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. So I will just start this presentation and I'll share my screen as we go. Hopefully you can see the first question. Excellent. And we do have, how many? We have 12 participants here, so I'll just wait for a few more seconds before we move on to the next one. Great. We'll wait for those last three to come in. Just in the interest of time, I think I will just go ahead. But what we're seeing here is that a lot of people are kind of confident or not very confident in how to measure advocacy in your organization. We are, at this point in time, not experts yet, but we have some really good ideas. So if I was answering this, I would put myself in the fairly confident category. But what we're here to help you with today is to take that confidence level slightly up. So hopefully this will be really useful to you. So the next question that I have for you is, what is your greatest challenge when measuring advocacy? And if you're not able to access the Mentimeter, please just answer it in the chat here. I want to make it as accessible for everyone as possible. Um, so, Katie, I love that. So if you just type your answers in and submit them, they'll pop up and we can have a little bit of a discussion on it. Great. Tools to use and what indicators are most meaningful. Very interesting. Oh, that's fascinating. I hope you're reading it as it's coming up, because um, when measuring impact in advocacy isn't an organizational priority, it's very difficult then to make the case for more effort into advocacy, right? So it's kind of a really double-edged sword in this situation. Um, Get to national tools are not clearly defined. So I think we're seeing a lot of things around it's difficult to prove the impact. It takes a lot of time. There's no kind of standard set of indicators available, and there's no tools. So based on this, again, we're hoping that we'll be able to give you some more on what to do and how you can do this. But really, I think we all resonate here, and I think these are the challenges that we have identified consistently over time and across all the organizations that we work with, that it is a real challenge to do this. So we'll move on to the next question, which is, what are, if you have used any methods so far, what are the most effective strategies that you've used to measure your advocacy? I'll give you a minute or two here to respond to that. And it's a completely viable answer also to say nothing. Great. Great. Excellent. So what I'm seeing kind of consistently across the tools and strategies are feedback. We love to know whether what we've presented, what we've shared is useful. That is an extremely good tool to use when you are trying to determine the ways forward. Questionnaires and then linking change to feedback, looking at process such as inputs and outputs, developing a framework based on that. These are all really, really great strategies. We're going to share with you a couple of the strategies that we have, which are mostly kind of inquiry based. So asking more questions is going to hopefully help you define the kind of tools that you need as well. So the next one is a bit more of a kind of a quick fire. What word or words come to your mind when we say attribution? And you can answer, you can put in multiple words here, and it'll generate a word cloud as we go. So think about anything that comes to your mind when you think about the word attribution. Great, that's really interesting. So we're seeing things that we expected to see here around causality, impact, giving credit, the direct linkage between something you do and something that you see. This is definitely what we know attribution to be, and responsibility, authorship, all of those things that are like, you know what, I did this thing and this is the result. Now we're going to get you to flip your thinking a little bit, and then what words come to your mind when we say contribution? Love that. Supported the change, input, partially affecting an outcome, helping one of many influences, support, giving, helping. Excellent. So I think the theme is very, very clear here. When we think about attribution, we're thinking about causation, causality, direct result. And when we talk about contribution, you're talking more about helping, giving, aiding, supporting. And I think I'll hand over to Eric in just a second, but I think if you keep that in your mind as we go through this presentation and the work that we're about to do, thinking about what it means to contribute, to support, that one's coming up really strongly. It is the very nature of advocacy work to support. You are supporting a cause. You can't advocate for advocacy, really, but you can advocate for something, and that's what I'd really like everyone to keep at the front of mind when we're working through this. So I'm going to end this now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I will flash my PowerPoint back up and I will hand over to Eric to take us through the next critical pieces. If I can get all of this aligned, bear with. Sorry, I know it's very clunky and I apologize for that. Here we go.
That's okay. Thank you, Sarah. And hi, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. Yeah, it's really nice from the Menti pool, some of the issues that are coming up. I think we set a baseline for this workshop or this session, that we know that advocacy work measurement is quite difficult. It's not a straightforward thing to do. And as we've seen in the pool that is coming up, we are also clear that this is so because in our advocacy work, we seek to change some decisions, behavior, relationships, priorities, and practices that are not easily measurable or direct. It's not a bounded service that we give, that we do this and then this happens. And we also know that in the policy and influencing change environment, our theory of change or the resource chain is quite long, because in most instances, it's around even recognizing the issue, the different actors accepting that this is an issue that we want to congregate around. Is one of the chains that we have to look into. It's also about agenda setting, right? How do we set the agenda that we accept that is an agenda we want to work on and to make that influence? And it's also about commitment, even before we get to the policy adoption. But we know that the work doesn't stop when the policy is adopted. It's also about implementation, and that goes with financing. So there's a long chain. And when you are measuring, it's not as easy as I deliver this intervention and this thing happens. So we also know that we operate in a very complex environment, as we discussed. And so the topic for today is, when we are thinking about measuring our policy efforts and our policy outcomes, we're looking at two things: contribution, attribution. Sarah has already set the ground rules and said that, okay, if from where we are coming from and from the discussion that we have, that we support, our contribution is really the most feasible way as when we look at measuring that advocacy work. Contribution, as we saw in the poll, is around causality, is around cause and effect, it's around something that is easily definable and mostly happen in more stable conditions. But this is really also the limitations when you think about it, because we are operating in a very complex environment in policy influencing. And then especially in Moving Minds Alliance, where we are thinking about influencing ECD policy in crisis setting, is more complex, right? So attribution in this sense, like we're looking at just one case example, that take, for example, what we're seeing on the screen is that we're implementing an education intervention program in Ethiopia. This program is really defined. The participants or the core target group that we are looking at is also bounded, define children in grades 1 to 4. And what are we trying to achieve? The outcome is literacy and SOL outcomes, right? We have well-defined groups where we are intervening, or the intervention is trying to say we are treating this group with this intervention, this solution. And then we have a more similar, comparable group that is being the counterfactual, okay, that this group doesn't receive the intervention. You're looking at seeing how your intervention has impacted on the group that have received the treatment. Attribution is feasible because we're thinking about a time-bound, stable environment. The intervention is clearly defined, and obviously you'll be able to measure the change within a shorter period of time. And in this case, we looked at a change which is around literacy and numeracy. So just look at the slide here and then think about some of the characteristics of this intervention and why an attribution measurement becomes feasible. When you flip it, and then here we talked about attribution and contribution as really the lenses that we are using to look at how we want to make claims about the impact of our intervention. We're asking the question, did this intervention cause this change? How much of that is caused by this change? But even in this program example that we are looking at, attribution is even limited only to the outcomes that I've mentioned here. If you go further and we're thinking about influencing the system, to actually embed, for example, this play-based learning approach in the education system in Ethiopia, it is not a question of attribution because there are different things that are happening. And that's where we want to jump into the issue of contribution. In the environment of contribution, it's not easy to isolate the effects of the intervention. So that's where we say we work alongside other actors and other factors. And we most feasibly are thinking about how did this intervention contribute to produce these outcomes that we're seeing or the change that we are seeing. So in this sense, as you see on the slide, we're saying that the chain is longer. The environment in which we're operating is very complex and mostly unstable. And we want to just, if we will limit ourselves to the alliance movement, we're operating in crisis settings. It could be a stop-start setting that we're operating in. We can make progress, and then the environment change, other external factors where we have no control over happens, and then we come back into a crisis setting, which means the progress that we made also changes. And we know that policy change is not a rational thing. And as Sarah mentioned in the introduction, it's not a linear thing. It's not like I do this and then this thing happens. We could make progress and then come back because there are complex issues that are happening there. The political environment issues that have to be looked at. Yes, we'll produce the evidence, we'll produce a research report, we'll bring the issue on the table. The issues might be accepted, there will be a recognition or commitment, but the political environment can change. And when that changes happen, we come back to it. So the influence that happens, our contribution, our readers might to the changes that is going to happen is in a very complex environment. And then we say that we want to focus on how we've supported, but not how your advocacy has. Only you can't claim causality in this context. And that is what we're looking at it when it comes to a contribution. And then the effect that happens could also, we can relapse given the changes that would happen. What if a natural disaster happens in the context? What happens? But the community themselves and then the political environment also influence the change. It's not only the advocacy efforts. That's why we are recognizing multiplicity of actors and things that are outside our control as policy actors to influence the changes that happens there. And it's very useful in a dynamic environment as we look at it. And we've talked about it in the introductions and in the earlier sessions, that we are working in a very complex and dynamic environment. But then our policy effort measurement should not only look at the end results, that as policy change happen, is an incremental, as Sarah mentioned in the introductory slide, that it happens in incremental basis. And when those things are happening, contribution as a measurement lens helps us to be able to isolate the efforts that we are making as an organization or as a network to the policy changes that we are looking at. But I've already talked about things can change quickly, setbacks can come, new development comes. You may even have to change your advocacy messaging. So what is the clear message from here as I end and pass over to Sarah to share some of the examples? Think that we are all recognizing the multiplicity of factors and actors in the system. So if an organization does a policy advocacy, it's feasible that we are looking at how your work has contributed to the observed change and not actually claiming the change. And we're also saying firmly that contribution analysis or contribution measurement or lens seems to be the most feasible way to assess how our work has contributed to a change that we are almost observing, a change whether in terms of policy acceptance, in terms of the resource contribution or commitment from the actors, or actually adoption of a certain policy position that the actors are advocating on. So without much ado, I would end here and then pass it over to Sarah to take us through some of the work that we're doing when it comes to contribution and advocacy measurement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I think that your little nuggets of wisdom that you're sharing, I would love to put it in a quote and put it on like as a social media post. So really, really brilliant. I'm just flashing up the theory of change of the Moving Minds Alliance to just show you, based on our strategy, what are we doing and how we're planning on doing it. And so, of course, we know that there's an element of the partnership, advocacy work, as well as knowledge generation. But you'll notice that when we talk about impact and we shift away from how are we going to do this by enabling an environment for actors to come together, by developing strategic partnerships and engaging in country, and by developing knowledge products, when we look at our impact, we're not naive enough to think that this is going to mean policy change. What we're hoping to achieve is a contribution in the sector in and of itself. So when we talk about the alliance is capable to advocate for impact, that we're seeing an increased ability for local actors to coordinate, that we're increasing engagement from relevant actors in the space, and that the alliance is also providing support. The whole raison d'etre of MMA seems to be a contributory framework. All of our work is around contributing to spaces and places where the ecosystem can be strengthened, where equitable partnerships shine, and where, increased funding and increased prioritization of locally led ECD is taken into account within these policy frameworks. So, of course, our context is as we've mentioned, that change is slow and nonlinear. There's so many other actors in this space, and we can't reasonably focus our outcomes only on children. It needs to be in the policy change, financing space, or in changes in practice as a result of what we're learning. So when I mentioned earlier about using contribution or using questions to frame your thinking, this is one of the key tools that I would say that, I can share these slides with you. We were going to be fleshing this out in a guide as well, but you want to base your evaluation tools on the questions that you're asking as a result of your advocacy work. So in essence, what you want to understand, for example, is, okay, did our advocacy work, did it reach the right people? If it did reach the right people, how do you prove that? So you would develop a stakeholder map, you would track your attendance, you would actually analyze the strength of your network as well and the health of your network by using kind of rubric level tools or diagnostics, which you can develop bespoke or you can adapt from existing sources. Again, we'll be sharing all of these kind of together for you. Then questions around, did people's knowledge change? Were you successful in kind of changing the way that somebody does something or how they understand ECD in crisis? Things like interviews, feedback surveys, reflection meetings, and even things like pre and post tests from trainings or from workshops can be really useful to help you understand whether your work changed someone's knowledge. Did relationships improve? So things like partnership assessment tools, network mapping and connections tools, and something that I came across recently, which I'm thinking, hey, this would be a great way to analyze our efforts is around a collaboration scorecard or rubric. So giving people that you work with the ability to rate how well they think we're all working together towards this end is a great indicator of whether your advocacy is doing what it intends to do. Then, of course, there's the more practical, long-term, tangible outcomes that I would encourage you to think long-term about. So when we're talking about policy changes, you want to know, did the policy change and did the funding change? We know that sustained effort over time will include things like reviewing policy documents, doing a timeline analysis, and understanding the context under which change is being made, as well as understanding, you develop a policy integration framework, which would help you understand that within your context, within your country, for example, to what extent did one part of the policy change to include ECD in crisis? Because if we constantly focus on policy change as like big P and big C, and you're looking for these massive shifts, you're going to have a really hard time feeling like something was accomplished and understanding what the contribution of your work was. So we encourage things like incrementally looking at how well is policy integrating ECD in crisis, for example, or any other area that you are trying to advocate for. When we're looking at funding changes, first you want to understand what is missing or what's there in terms of the funding, and then you want to be tracking over time, whether that's with partners, whether that's through your own analyses, through financial analyses that are being done. You want to understand whether funding changes happened, and then you want to understand also, was the donor base diversified, because that will be a change in funding. Doesn't have to mean increase or decrease or anything like that, but it's about what did you support the change in the system to enable this for the future. So when we talk about incremental changes, it's really important to dive into the kind of questions that you need to have. So the more focused your question, the more focused your tools can be. And then finally, when we want to know, can we demonstrate our contribution? That would be around developing evaluation methodologies that are focused on contribution analysis, on outcome harvesting, which is a lot more dynamic and developmental rather than fixed and answering the extent to which something happened. And then as well, of course, I'm not trying to move away from process monitoring, because that's really important. How much you do, who you engage, how much they're learning, how much those relationships are improving are all very critical elements and need to be integrated into kind of multiple phased approaches when you are thinking about contribution. Because I think when it comes to advocacy measurement, there's a big question mark, and it feels really huge. But breaking your advocacy components down, okay, we're going to focus only on partnerships in with local organization to do XYZ. Okay, we're only going to focus on diversifying the donor landscape so that we can influence this. These are the kind of things that these questions will help to frame and help you not just design a great advocacy measurement strategy, but also then help redesign the kind of advocacy you're doing in any specific context. So we hope that this has been useful. I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 10-ish minutes, so I don't know whether that's going to be enough time, but I'd like you to just read this case study that we have. As quick as you can, maybe about 5 minutes, and we'll get into a discussion around some of the we'll get into a discussion, but I'll stop talking for a second, leave you to read this, and I have a couple of questions for you after. And if anyone is having trouble reading, I'm very happy to copy and paste this text. I'll do that anyway. I'll just give 30 more seconds here to finish reading. If everyone has finished reading, if you could give a thumbs up. Great. Good. Okay, I think most people are there. Are we happy for me to move on to the question? Great. So what I'd like to talk about for the next hopefully 10 minutes or is around in this case, which I've also pasted in the chat. Let's focus on the first question is what would credible evidence of advocacy contribution look like for this example? So we know that there's the 24 months, these are the changes or results that you've seen, but what does that credible evidence look like to you? And feel free to jump in or put up your hands or anything like that.
I mean, I can start. I think there are a couple of examples of um, policy change, funding change. So I'd want to document what was there before and what was there after, and maybe also since we're not talking about, 100% direct impact chain, think about what else had been happening and what other kind of maybe influences or advocacy efforts were underway, or maybe, other things that were already maybe underway that were just amplified.
Great.
Can I come in?
Yes, of course, Anna Maria.
I think that also another evidence will be people to have better understanding of the topic itself, because we often think that people fully know what we're talking about. So the baseline sometimes is blurry, but people, having more use of terms, especially those that are specific for a line of work, it's also evidence of advocacy contributions being effective.
I love that. Yep. Anyone else? There's really no wrong answer.
Hi, Sarah. I think when we look at the measurement bit that we talked about, we also looked at the process. So even if we look at the first bit of it, like the process, the coalition building, where local partners are really been strengthening this issue is like Anna Maria talked about issue recognition is coming up. We see that as also an evidence of. So if we are tracing it even from the issue recognition to now making commitments, and then the evidence being referred by the decision of the policy actors would also be ways to kind of evidence your contribution to these changes that are happening in terms of the donor funding coming in and some of the 2028 plan. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So I think I'd just like to draw your attention to the kinds of answers that you're giving. It's really around a feel, isn't it? In a lot of ways, it's around a feel. So what are the language changes? You can't sit there and scribe, but I think it is about creating a narrative or sharing the story of change through what are the narrative changes that are happening? What are the kind of soft things that are changing over time, as well as looking at the processes, right? So you want to be mapping your outputs and the things that you're doing against some of the subtlest changes that you're seeing, and that's going to give you a picture of what what your contribution look like. So in terms of if we take the example of for, Anna Maria, I'm going to use your example of the subtle language changes. What kind of tool might you use to assess that change?
I think because we work a lot on capacity building for refugee leaders,
Yeah.
we often walk with them through their first advocacy spaces. So once we see them using the language of the sector and improving their advocacy strategy, we we ask them for a small report on how they feel, how they think they did their presentation, what kind of tools they need. So a small report, something about the narrative from their perspective, it's often useful. It's a lot of work, but it's useful.
Great. I like that. And I think that there is along with contribution analysis and work in contribution, and when you're thinking about advocacy and measurement, I will always be a proponent of more qualitative tools, right? So doing things like reporting, doing things like even there's a method used called most significant change that I'm sure a lot of you will know about. Using this in spaces would be great. And I'm seeing a lot of answers in the chat, but I would invite anyone who's writing in the chat to maybe elaborate a little bit more on your comments in the chat. Maybe I might pick on someone if that's okay.
I might actually,
Yeah.
I would love to hear more. Do you have an example of using most significant change? And I don't know, could you just speak to that a little bit more? That's interesting to
Well,
me.
I haven't used it in the advocacy context yet, but we did use it in my previous role where we talked about most significant change as a result of providing transitional transitional shelter for children who are street connected. So it was around what those experiences meant for all of the children, and so how you it's a kind of a very technical thing where you get everyone kind of in a group and everybody shares their stories and then everybody kind of ranks them, and then you think about and how you get to it is what is the thing that was considered most significant for the population. So if we apply this to the advocacy context, I might be tempted to do something like that, for example, with a coalition to see what are the changes that you feel were most significant coming into this space and as a result of being in this for a couple of years now, for instance. And what we would then do is take those stories, the most significant change stories, and we would then start to look at what are the most common things that people are saying, and then rerun it again until you get to a point where the most significant change identified by this group for this purpose was XYZ. So I think that that kind of qualitative tool can be really powerful, and it can also lead to you understanding that, okay, maybe the advocacy effort didn't result in a policy change, but it resulted in incredible awareness of this issue, which might be a step in the wider sense of the systems change that you're trying to see. So what we want to really focus on and what we want to really push for here is understanding that advocacy work by nature is contributory to a wider change, and that just because we're not seeing massive results in short periods of time doesn't mean that you're not contributing to something that's happening. So hopefully some of these tools and some of the our discussion today enabled this kind of understanding for you. And as a little, bonus piece, I'd just like to share some of the indicators that Moving Minds Alliance is planning to use and has started tracking for its advocacy work. And these are kind of I've kind of separated them into thinking about representation, participation, change that is long term, and then what the contributory indicators are as well. So when we talk about representation, it's about reflecting the ECD in crisis sector. And we want to talk about what we're hoping to look at. What are the percentage of target partners? So if we say that localization and locally led approaches are critically important, what proportion of our membership is locally led? Who are the RLOs and LLOs that we're engaging? We want to understand the degree of equity in participation within the group. So we know that we have this ethical partnership, the equitable partnerships guide. I'd like to assess that, and we'd like to understand how, from the participants' perspective, how well we're achieving that. The degree of perceived usefulness and satisfaction with MMA activities is a really key piece because everyone had said, as we looked at before, that feedback is critically important to understanding how well advocacy efforts are going. So we're really interested in that. From the participation side, we want to know how much of our membership is actually engaging with the work that we're doing. Who else have we gotten around the table that we weren't able to before? We also want to understand, um, like I said, connected to representation, there's the local to global representation for our partnership and how that's changing. And then we also want to understand the reach. So the number of people accessing the development, the tools and the guides, etc., that we're producing. These are metrics that enable us to understand how well are we engaging people with our materials, with our advocacy materials particularly. Then when we look into the longer term indicators of success, we're looking at, because we're advocating for direct funding to RLOs and LLOs when it comes to ECD and crisis response and provision of services, that's a key indicator that we're going to be hopefully tracking over time based on the financial analysis that has already been done. Then we also want to understand the inclusion of ECD and crisis into national policy and budgeting frameworks, which is something that we're going to be hopefully building alongside the work that's been done in Colombia with Carlos del Castillo. He's done a lot of work in the ECD and ECD space. Oh God, I have 1 minute. But it's around developing a policy integration framework that allows you to kind of rate or rank how well the policy change is happening. Then we're also looking at increasing the number of in ECD champions in our target countries. And then when it comes to the contribution indicators, this is a lot around the research products we produce, the policy briefs, the case studies, etc. So it's a combination of process and advocacy and training and all of those types of indicators that we're trying to get all in one place. I'm so sorry that was very rushed, but we have 20 seconds before we get kicked out. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Thank you.